Welcome back to LSX Hunter. Today we are looking at two powerhouse engines, the Pontiac 455 and the Big Block Chevy 454. So join us as we explore these two engines with their specs, the vehicles they powered, and horsepower torque ratings. So let's go ahead and put these two big V8s against each other. Both the Pontiac 455 and the Big Block Chevy 454 are icons of American automotive history, showcasing power, performance, and the glory of V8 engines. Let's take a look at their specs to begin with. First off, the Pontiac 455 featured displacement of 455 cubic inches or 7.5 liters with a V8 configuration like we've come to expect. Now, utilizing a bore and stroke of 4.151 inches by 4.21 inches, the solid foundation for muscle and torque. Now, in stock form, it typically produced like 250 to 370 horsepower, depending on year, model, compression, all that stuff, and a ridiculous 370 to 500 pounds of torque. Now, on the other side, we have the Big Block Chevy 454. This V8 carries a displacement of 7.4 liters with a bore and stroke of 4.25 inches by 4 inches square. Now, the 454 is used in a range of years, so the horsepower and torque ratings are just all over the charts here. They're from 230 to 450 horsepower and 360 to 500 pounds of torque. Now, obviously, depends on year, model, all that good stuff because, man, there's a wide range there. But let's go ahead and take a look at the vehicles that house these engines. Now, the Pontiac 455 came under a wide variety of Pontiac models, right? Including the Firebird Trans Am, the Grand Prix, the Bonneville, Catalina, GTO, Le Mans. Now, all these cars kind of embodied that essence of American muscle and showcase the power and performance of the Pontiac 455 engine. Meanwhile, the Big Block Chevy 454 came in its own kind of host of vehicles. The Chevelle SS, the Z28 Camaro, the Impala SS, the Monte Carlo, the Vet, as well as much of C and K truck series. Now, it's also came in some motorhomes, so you can find it fairly cheap, but obviously power is going to range pretty dramatically. Now, the cool thing with these big displacement engines is they take really well to aftermarket upgrades. So things like intake manifolds, camshafts, headers, full exhaust systems. The entire change is more dramatized by the huge displacements of these engines. You swap a cam to 350, you're going to gain a little bit, but you swap a cam at a 455 or 454, and you are gaining 100 plus horsepower typically. But the big gains come from switching those heads out during the smog era years, much like any other Pontiac 400. Small block 400, the other engines really showcased kind of what is there, but the 455 and 454 really showcased what's possible with just raw power. And these engines are still drag race engine showcase to this day. So now let's go ahead and jump into the engine simulator software and let's take a look at the difference in bore and stroke, how that impacts engine stuff. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do something a little different than we usually do. We're going to go ahead and do a direct comparison of these engines. Say these are the same head flows. These are the same, just everything across the board except for bore and stroke. Now, our curiosity here is if these two engines were exactly even, what the difference would be. So let's take a look at that. We're going to start off looking at the Pontiac 455. This Pontiac is set up with the 60599 Pontiac Edelbrock heads, the single plane intake, pretty standard stuff here, 800 CFM carb, normal 1.75 inch by 34 inch headers, and a Edelbrock 7157 hydraulic camshaft. This is a 231, 240 duration, something like 516 lift with 165 rockers and a 113.5 LSA, like a 1.5 to 2 degree advance on that camshaft. So with that, we should be something along the lines of 510 horsepower at 5,500 RPM and some insane number of like 552 pounds of torque at 4,000 RPM in the Pontiac. Now, if we go and take a look at a pretty standard 454 setup, this is going to be with Brodix Big Block Chevy heads, a Lunati Voodoo cam that's 230, 235 duration with 0.541 lift on intake and 551 lift on exhaust with 114 degree LSA. So it's really a comparable camshaft. The heads do flow significantly better than the Edelbrock Pontiacs. Again, single plane intake manifold. But all of that coming together means something like 500 horsepower at 5,500 RPM, something like 515 pounds of torque at 4,500 RPM. The camshaft plays a little difference here. The head flow, being it's going to flow more CFM, means there's a lot more head room to grow. So if you did throttle boost or anything like that, the Big Block is going to walk away with this. But the Pontiac, I mean, hit for hit is pretty solid, especially for cost at that range. They're about the same cost. So let's go and take a look at this side by side with the same bore and stroke, just so we can get a real clear picture of this versus that. So being as the 455 is my bread and butter, we're going to go ahead and use that as our baseline here. So this is a 4.15 inch bore by 4.21 inch stroke. And now that's going to end up being, as we see here, 510 at 5,500 and 552 at 4,000. There's the curve. Pretty smooth, even curve. But if we go ahead and throw that to the 4.25 by 4 bore and stroke used in the 454, we're going to come up with some interesting stuff. We're going to throw the rod length in as well of 6.13 inches, which honestly brings us to really comparable to Pontiac territory. So it looks like the way the Pontiac does their head flow actually is what makes a big difference here. A lot of times, the Pontiac has higher port velocities over Big Block Chevys because of that large CFM found on the Big Blocks, which is cool. It's great, but using that same Pontiac like design philosophy with the bore and stroke of the Big Block Chevy, you really get the best of both worlds. Now we actually see a gain of like 10 horsepower and only a couple pounds of torque, but it really moved that torque up just a hair because of that bore and stroke change, but it really evened everything out. It's really interesting to see how close these engines actually are and how much of the power for the Pontiacs really comes down to the head flow and how things work inside of that engine rather than just the bore and stroke factor. But if you guys like this video, hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll do more videos just like this. Maybe next time with a 302 and a 305, or maybe a 302 versus 302. Who knows? We'll take a look and see what we got, guys. Have a good one, and I'll see you around.